Good Sunday evening, everybody. My name is Jesse, alongside Doug and Chris. Welcome to another edition of Dirty Leather. Excuse me. The first of the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. If you celebrate Christmas, hopefully you had a Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Hanukkah, hopefully you had a Happy Hanukkah. And if you celebrated Kwanzaa, Hope you had a Happy Kwanzaa. Otherwise than that, Happy Holidays. Hopefully everybody had a really good holiday. So again, first show of the new year. We're getting very close to pitchers and catchers reporting, hopefully within the next month. So baseball season is around the corner. So just a little bit more time until we start getting into the first signs of spring, spring training, Florida League, so on and so forth. Really exciting time. We still have a lot of off season to go through, and we have a lot to cover, especially with the free agent market. But before we go into uh, our our opening rants, I just want to take the time to thank all of the viewers for an amazing 2025. You guys have shared this podcast. You've listened to us hundreds and thousands of times. Really appreciate it. And we're hoping to do a lot more in 2026. There's a lot of baseball to go around. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to learn. And there's a lot to talk about. So, again, for all of us here at Stadium Rant and Dirty Leather, we thank you for continuing to listen to us. And we hope to join you on the ride through the 2026 season when that starts within the next month or two. So, with that being said, we're going to get right into our weekly rants. Again, we have a lot to talk about this week, especially that we've been on a little bit of a break for the last 3 weeks. So, we're going to start off with Doug. So, Doug, what's your weekly rant for the first show of the new year?
Well, thanks, Jesse. Happy New Year to our audience. As Jesse was saying, good to be back and start 2026 with my favorite Dirty Leather crew. I'm surprised you didn't mention actually coming up is my favorite event, the World Baseball Classic, and the rosters are starting to formulate for that
Yeah.
event. So spring training is going to be interrupted by that, but that's fine with me. So in fact, I'm a huge hockey fan as well. We've got the Winter Olympics with the NHL rosters, and then spring training, and then the World Baseball Classic, and then the start of the MLB season. So awesome sporting events to look ahead to. So I wanted to do a quick salute and show my Christmas gift here. I don't know if you can see that, but I've got baby Vladdy. That's a gift from my
Oh,
kids with the Montreal Expos uniform on. Of course, Vladimir
nice.
Guerrero Jr. Vladimir Guerrero Sr. was a star with the Montreal Expos when Vladdy Jr. was born in the year, I think it was 99 when he was born. So that was a classic pose that Vladdy Jr. did at Olympic Stadium one day. But Vladdy Jr. was in fact born in Montreal. So he is, in effect, a Canadian citizen. Now, we've been pushing for Vlad Jr. to play for Team Canada in the WBC, but he is loyal to his family's origins, in which case he's going to play for the DR. So he is committed to play for the Dominican Republic. So that's not my rant, but I'm a little bit sad about that. I was hoping that he'd play for Team Canada, but it's looking like he's not going to. He's committed to play for the DR, which is fine. So go Dominican Republic. I'm hopeful that they're going to have the strongest roster possible and that everyone can play. Albert Pujols is the manager for that team. So you can imagine those Dominican Republic players will probably be more than eager to play for Albert Pujols. But anyway, my rant was coming out today. Sam Blum of The Athletic was saying that Anthony Rendon is willing to have his contract restructured so that some capital can be freed for the Anaheim Angels, Los Angeles Angels, to pursue some free agents. So that's kind of nice of Anthony Rendon to agree to that. Now they were to owe him $38 million for the final year of his contract. That was a big mistake, that contract from the beginning with the Los Angeles Angels.
Yep.
Anthony Rendon, he was a star with the Washington Nationals, was an integral player with their World Series push for 2019. Awesome player. But then he seemed to collapse once he signed that big deal with the Angels. And I think it was for 7 years, $245 million to begin in 2020. So this is heading into the final stages of his deal. He's now willing to have that extended over the next 3 to 5 years. They've made an agreement, and that frees up some money for the Angels to pursue some free agents or whoever's left in the market. Because the Angels have really been strapped for cash with that Rendon contract, plus Trout being locked up for the next, 10 years? I think it's still, no, 2020, still 2029 is when that deal ends. And that's
Yes.
35 million per year. So my rant, in effect, is Mike Trout, if you really want to see this franchise move in the right direction and move from the crutches of that Anthony Rendon contract and your contract, and formerly the Ohtani contract.
Yep.
Moreover, if you want to go there, the Tyler Skaggs fiasco, which they had to hand a undisclosed amount over the family for that's finally gone away. So the Angels are finally starting to move in a different direction, and they freed up a little bit of capital. But my pledge would be for Mike Trout to now take a selfless move and have some of his deal spread out and deferred so that the Angels can free up some more money and look towards competing in that AL West. Because the AL West, as we've seen, is becoming more and more competitive. Jesse, you've alluded to it in your recent articles with the A's restructuring their lineup and going out and actually pursuing some free agents, making some trades, and making their lineup stronger.
Yep.
The Angels have not been able to do that. But I'm hopeful now with this Rendon restructuring, hopefully they can look towards becoming competitive. Now, they picked up some pitchers through some trades. They got Grayson Rodriguez. They've also signed Alek Manoah, which was a really strange move from my perspective. Hopefully they're seeing something that the rest of us aren't, and that there's still some life left in that Alek Manoah arm. But my rant would be for Trout to really make a selfless move, look towards restructuring that deal so that the Angels can be competitive, because it's looking like they're the only team really that's kind of being left out in terms of being competitive for 2026. So Mike Trout, let's go. Let's see some leadership and, make a decision to help your ball club out. So that's my rant.
Yeah. Just really quickly before we move on a little bit, I think that Rendon contract's going to go down as one of the worst in history. I mean, we're talking about probably less than 200 games or just around that ballpark with very little production. That was a huge waste of money and a huge waste of time. And of course, that completely handicapped them in terms of trying to lock down Shohei Ohtani, lock down any potential free agents, and build around those two players, both Ohtani and Trout. So I definitely agree with you that maybe it's time for Trout to look at restructuring his contract, or at least accepting maybe some money and upfront and just leaving some of that that cap space open for larger moves down the line to possibly build around future players, such as, Zach Neto or Logan O'Hoppe, who I still really like as a catcher. So we'll see what happens. I don't think he's going to do it, but it would be a very, very great move for the captain of the Angels and arguably one of the best players of the 2010s and early 2020s, if you want to go that far. And it would be really, really awesome to see the Angels in contention again.
It would be great for the sport. He's been an ambassador for the game, and to make a move in that direction would be great for the game. Especially getting into collective bargaining and so forth.
Yeah, I think it would be great for him to do as a leader. I think it would be great for the Angels for him to do it. I am not convinced that the Players Association would be happy with him doing it, because for the sole fact that it's going to then open the door to pushing more and more players that get pressured to do that, which at the end of the day, none of them have to do. I think it would be great for the team for him to do it that way, and somebody like, not to go to NFL, but, Tom Brady was famous for constantly restructuring his contract. David Ortiz took 1-year deals and did different things to sort of try to help the team. So it's not unprecedented by any stretch of the imagination, and I think it helps the team. But the problem is, at the end of the day, the team offered the contract and the players signed it, and there's going to be players that aren't going to want to do that. And so if somebody like Trout does it, will other players feel pressured to have to do it, whether they want to or not? And then how does that impact, contract offers? How does that impact, other things? I don't see a problem with it, but I see the Players Association having a problem with it. So I don't know how that would go down.
I don't know.
Bad,
bad contracts where that are locked in with an AAV of 35 million plus, and if the player is not even playing, right, and year after year after year, and the team is locked in for 6, 8, 10 years. I mean, even the players' union would have to be somewhat. I mean, they wouldn't be vocally opposed to that, but there's got to be someone within that union who knows that that's not good for the sport, right? I would think.
Yeah,
but I think the flip side would end up being that owners could then say, well, then we need to stop doing these contracts altogether and take away the contract completely, which again may be good for the sport. But players are already complaining that owners aren't really offering their current value, or whatever, and baseball players are paid better than any of the 4 major sports, I would say, as far as, especially because of the guarantees.
Yeah, you can argue that the NBA is still.
Yeah, NBA, one or the other, yeah, for sure. They're both right there. But I would say that, I think the MLB Players Association has fought really hard to be that league for the players, and I don't think they're going to want to relinquish some of that flexibility for the sake of, owners who they already argue should be spending more than they are as it is, and to try to help them become even cheaper. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if they're going to be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult conversation. I would agree with you. It's a very, very powerful union. I will say that as far as players' unions go, the MLB Players Association is probably the strongest one of the major sports.
Yeah.
Like, I will agree
definitely.
with that.
Let's just really briefly about the MLBPA. They are very strong. They do have a very strong leader in Tony Clark. They have really pushed hard. And don't forget, we have the CBA negotiations that will happen during the course of the season. So that's going to be fun regardless. And who knows, deferments might be a part of that conversation, especially with Ohtani's mega contract from the Dodgers with all of those deferments. That might be something to look at in 2026. But let's kind of reel it back a little bit. I definitely agree that the MLBPA is definitely one of the strongest, if not the strongest, players union in the entire sport. With that being said, just kind of moving on gears a little bit to my rant for this week. Of course, it's about the Yankees, go figure. And it's really just very, very succinct and very brief. The strategy for this offseason is not working. And it's not for the way that you think. Yes, most of their offseason has hinged on the decision made by Cody Bellinger. He has not yet made a decision. He is still up in the air for a whole bunch of teams. Kyle Tucker is still up there as well. But there's so much has happened in that front office with not much results. And one of the main things and one of the main factors that nobody's really talked about is the international free agency period. That's going to be starting within the next week or two. Now, the reason I bring that up is because the Yankees were poised to sign a 16-year-old shortstop, international free agent prospect by the name of Wandy Asigan. Now, he is out of the Caribbean. Again, ranked number 2 prospect on MLB Pipeline's top international free agent prospects. Again, 16 years old, could easily transition to second base or transition to third base if the Yankees wanted to. Yankees looked very, very poised to get him. However, for some reason, the front office decided to make a major shakeup in that department where you saw the international free agent scout essentially resign and then drop, and then have that whole department be pretty much rearranged and have an entire facelift. And as a result, for some reason, I don't know what the conversation was, Wandy Asigan decided to walk away from the Yankee contract and go over the crosstown rival Mets, which was pretty much one of the most interesting moves by international free agent prospects within the last couple of years. You don't usually see that. You don't usually see international free agent prospects or any players in general walk out of a Yankee contract of any scale. That's very interesting. And I think that really just goes to show that this entire offseason, plan hinging on the decision of Cody Bellinger, as well as doing major changes to major parts of your front office in the middle of an offseason where it's still quite very active and none of the international free agent signings have happened yet. That's made them miss out on not only a Segan, but also possibly made them miss out on Tatsuya Imai, who we'll get into in a little bit. Kazuma Okamoto, who again we'll get to in a little bit, and a whole bunch of other pitchers too they might be missing out on. This could be one of their worst off seasons in recent memory. Usually you see a major Yankee move. Again, we saw it a couple of years ago with Aaron Judge coming back to the New York Yankees, 9 years, $360 million. Then we saw it after the previous CBA was agreed to, with them signing Carlos Rodon. Then we saw it last year with Max Fried signing with the team. We haven't seen that. And it's starting to get to crunch time a little bit, because don't forget, pitchers and catchers will report within the next month. So they still have a few holes in their offense and in their bullpen, for lack of better terms. So this strategy of waiting for Superman to come, which essentially is Cody Bellinger, to make a decision, that's cost them. That's costing them a lot of time and a lot of resources. And if they're not careful and they lose out on Cody Bellinger, they've lost a major part of their offense. And if they lose out on Kyle Tucker as a consolation prize, it might not be a very good 2026 in the Bronx, unless the young players that do get called up can really step up and fill in that hole, both on the offense and also on the pitching side, especially with the loss of Clark Schmidt. You do get Garrett Cole back. You will get Carlos Rodon back in May. You will get Anthony Volpe back in May. But that, if it stays like this, April's going to be really, really rough for
I noticed
Yankees.
that you picked up Paul DeYoung, right? Paul DeYoung was picked up today. He actually has some pop. He could be a pleasant surprise. He's potentially you could see a resurgence from him to the tune of 20, 25 home runs if he's in the lineup every day, which I don't think he will be. But what Paul DeYoung is on the right side of the plate, Ryan McMahon is on the left side of the plate. Very similar offensive type players, I think. And both guys are not defensive liabilities. So if you have to go with Paul DeYoung at shortstop and Ryan McMahon at third base on opening day, that's not the worst thing in the world. It's not.
Yeah, it's not the worst. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's Paul DeYoung is a solid utility player, and he could definitely fill that role for Anthony Volpe. But don't forget, you also have Jose Caballero, who was really good down the stretch.
Yeah,
and then you did bring back another player. His name escaped my mind, unfortunately. But you do have a couple of infielders that you can select from that could help for that first month. But this is going to be a really rough month, especially without Rodon and Cole.
If the headline news is Trent Grisham accepting the qualifying offer, if that's your big headline news for your offseason,
yes,
it sort of indicates that it hasn't been a smashing success, right?
Yeah, it has not been a smashing success for the Yankees. All right, before we move on, Chris, do you have your rant? Do you want to add anything else to that?
I don't have much to add. I agree. I think it's been a very surprising Yankees offseason, especially since, there was some talk going into it that, Hal was finally seeing the light and was going to spend money 100% and wasn't worried about, anything he'd been previously worried about. And it seems like it actually turned out the exact opposite. And in a lot of ways, I think the Red Sox have had a better offseason, but for sure, we've plugged a few holes that we needed to plug, but it's also been very underwhelming for what we were promised, especially as a team, that was finally in the playoffs last year, that haven't won a playoff series in 4 seasons, that haven't, another team that's supposed to be perennial powerhouse that just hasn't operated that way, so I think, both our teams have been in a similar boat. And like you said, we've got some serious holes still, and and we don't have the benefit of that many people coming back healthy. What you see is what you get, and we've still got some holes there. So, I think with some of the moves this week, with Toronto especially, it might give us a little bit more of a inside track on filling some of those holes, and we'll get into that obviously later on in the show. But I think our teams are in a similar situation, and it's interesting. My rant was actually going to be pretty connected to some of the stuff we were talking about with Doug's rant as well. Specifically, I was going to be talking about the CBA and how it's running out, and it doesn't. We don't hear. I mean, granted, we usually don't. Until crunch time. It seems almost like the two sides barely talk until they're like 3 weeks away from the CBA lapsing, and then all of a sudden they finally decide it's important to talk. So we really haven't heard anything other than that. It seems like
it'll be the elephant in the room. It'll be the elephant in the room right until the last minute, like it always
exactly, and it seems like it's all we keep hearing is that the sides are very far apart again. So that isn't a particularly encouraging sign. But what I wanted to connect it to on Fraud my rant is how the off season is operating, and it always when we're going into an off season like this, the last year of a CBA where things are still kind of up in the air. It's always interesting because we'll never really know, right? No owner is ever going to come out necessarily and say, oh yeah, I did this because you don't know what the CBA is going to look like, so I'm not signing anybody. I'm not doing anything major because I don't know what it's going to look like, or only trading players because we don't know what the CBA is going to look like. But it's got to be a factor in a lot of their thinking. And so, I've wondered, if some of the bigger market teams that could get hammered more, potentially teams like the Yankees, teams like the Red Sox, that are teams that could potentially push a threshold if those owners are worried there's going to be something more coming down the pike on those, whether that makes them consider what they spend in this offseason, and whether they're worried about getting, punched in the face in the CBA, when it comes around, and instead they're trying to sort of, protect themselves a little bit there. Because a lot of the teams we've seen jump into some of these are outside of the Dodgers, who are just, the Dodgers of the Dodgers. A lot of the higher market teams haven't been spending, and it's the ones that sort of have some wiggle room, that are good and have some wiggle room there that have really been the ones getting some of the biggest splashes this offseason. And so I do wonder if some of that is, plays a role in how the offseason has gone so far.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot's happening with that. A lot's happening with the CBA. Again, we won't know a lot about it until middle part of the season, later part of the season. Who knows? Maybe something will happen beforehand. Maybe something will happen months after the fact, but we'll see. But we do have to move on with the show. We do have to get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, which is just going over some of the largest moves within the last couple of weeks. And we're going to start off with another Toronto Blue Jays signing. The Toronto Blue Jays have had a really, really active offseason. They have added to that by signing Japanese third and first baseman Kazuma Okamoto to a 4-year, $60 million contract. That essentially gives Toronto another power hitter to complement Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So when you look at his stats, he had a really good run in the NPO in Japan. He had 6 straight years of 30-plus home runs, plus an 850 OPS or better. Very strong power bat, very strong eye. Now, whether or not that translates into the MLB, we will see what happens. Maybe he will translate very well. Maybe he won't translate very well and be a rocky start. But he does have a very high power ceiling, an accomplished hitter, and he can also get on base through contact. He had a 411 OPS in an injury-shortened season in 2025. He was 362 OBP in 2024. He's really good at getting on base. He's not the fastest base runner, however. He does not steal a lot of bases, if at all, but he does draw walks, and he will help you get some runs. Here's the problem, though, with the signing. This is the downside. The problem is that there's 2 things. Number one, where do you fit him at this point? He's a third baseman and a first baseman. Obviously, you're not going to throw Guerrero Jr. off of first base because you can't bump him to DH because George Springer's there. So, and George Springer has one more year left of his contract. No way you trade George Springer. So, do you move him to third base? The problem with third base is that Addison Barger's there, and he was really good in the World Series and the playoffs. Really clutch hitter. Now, so the question is, where do you put him at this point? Do you bump? Do you possibly bump uh, Barger to the outfield? Do you put Okamoto at third base? Do you try to give him reps in the outfield? Where do you shuffle some stuff around? But I think one thing that's kind of getting lost in that is that might be a sign, or this signing might be an indication that the Blue Jays, unfortunately, are not very confident that Bo Bichette will re-sign with the team. Because if they have signed Okamoto and intend on plugging him to third base, that could potentially mean they might try to move Barger or try to develop him as a shortstop, possibly during the offseason. But I think indications are they are not very confident about their negotiations with Bo Bichette, hence why they decided to go out and get a nice power bat and a contact bat and a good eye in Okamoto. But again, I think the overarching thing here is that the Blue Jays have had a really, really good offseason. What say you, Doug?
Well, you made some really key points, and you're spot on with the number one reason why they picked up Okamoto, and that is his rate of contact. He makes contact, right? And he does not strike out. So that fits the mold of the 2025 Blue Jays perfectly. So they're kind of heading into 2026 with a similar mentality. And another point you made was versatility. I can tell you where Okamoto is going to play. He's going to play exactly where John Schneider feels he should play, right? And that's not a problem. Versatility and depth is not a problem. That was the hallmark of the Blue Jays' success for 2025. He can play third base. If he plays third base, then you're going to move Clement over to second. You got an all-world shortstop with Jimenez. Jimenez is not going anywhere. He's going to play short. And in terms of grooming Barger for potentially being a shortstop, I don't see that happening. Barger was going to be groomed as a third baseman of the future, but keeping Barger in right field is not a problem. He's an outstanding right fielder. He showed that in the playoffs and in the World Series. So having Barger as your starting right fielder and then having Springer kind of float from DH back to the outfield is not a huge issue. Now, I think Santander is probably going to be the starting DH, which means that Okamoto is going to have to fight hard for playing time. Now, it's a contract that he's signed for 4 years. That doesn't mean he's guaranteed a starting position. I mean, his stats look great on paper. I hope he earns a spot in the lineup. But the Jays are stacked, man. There's no guarantee that he's going to be starting at third. It's like when they picked up Ty France from Minnesota, right? Which was a strange move heading down into the stretch last year. He's a Gold Glove first baseman. Well, we have a Gold Glove first baseman in Vladdy. He makes great contact. He's a good hitter. Well, we've got great hitters. We've got guys who can make great contact. So Ty France was a great guy to have off the bench, but I mean, he didn't see very much PT. And that might be the case with Okamoto. He's going to have to earn every bit of playing time that John Schneider gives him. So he looks great on paper. Great job, Andrew Tinish and the international scouting department of the Toronto Blue Jays going out again after they signed first Cody Ponce and now Kazuma Okamoto, who was kind of off the radar in terms of the big name Japanese signees, right? I didn't hear his name mentioned very much, right? But it looks like they really got a guy here who could be a really solid contact hitter, hopefully a really solid 25 to 30 home run man if he can work his way into the starting lineup. But like I said, there's no guarantees. If this were the White Sox, he'd be starting on day one at first base or at third. If this were, half the teams in MLB, he'd be guaranteed a starting position. But the Blue Jays are a World Series contender. So he might get playing time. He might not. If he doesn't, he seems like a really versatile guy, like you said, to have off the bench, an expensive guy to have off the bench, but potentially a valuable guy to have off the bench nonetheless. And the Jays have a handful of guys like that. who would start
Yes.
anywhere else. So I don't see it as being a problem. And the other point that you made was it looks like they're probably moving away with this signing from signing Bo Bichette. I wouldn't go there just yet. I think they're still in serious negotiations with Bichette because, like I said, Okamoto, they didn't sign him with the intention of him being 100% the opening day starting third baseman, right? Mm-hmm. So there's still room there to sign Bichette. I still think he's a priority, but I do see Tucker as sort of moving away from the free agent signee conversation in terms of signing with the Jays. I don't see Tucker signing with the Jays at this point. So yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, and if they did want to sign Tucker, that would be a whole other discussion because of the absolute mammoth payroll that they would have if they signed Tucker. But again, that's a discussion for another day. But again, just, you know, moving on to another player that recently made a decision with signing with the team. Tatsuya Imai goes to the Houston Astros. And this is a very interesting contract structure. A 3-year, $63 million contract, but it does come with opt-outs after the end of this season and then after the end of the 2027 season. So 2 opt-outs until the end of his contract in 2028. Very interesting setup for this contract. I believed at the time, a couple weeks ago, that Imai could possibly fall to the Cubs because they did need some pitching. And I believe the Cubs have a lure of some really, really good talent and playoff ambitions. So the Astros were not really rumored to be a team in consideration for Tatsuya Imai. So this comes as a little bit of a surprise to a lot of fans and a lot of pundits on baseball. But this is a great signing for the Astros because, number one, this will likely blunt or mute some of the hurt that will happen when Framber Valdez does sign with another team. It's unlikely that he's going to sign with the Astros, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So it's that's number one. He's an excellent companion piece to Hunter Brown, who came really, really close to upsetting for the Cy Young this year, but again was behind Tariq Skubal and Garrett Crochet.
He got some votes.
Yeah, he did get some votes, but Tatsuya Imai is coming off of a great season in the NPO. He went 10-5 with a sub-2 ERA and 178 strikeouts over 163 and 2/3 innings pitched. He had a whip of under 0.9, which is fantastic. And when you look at his scouting report, you see rave reviews. He has a 99-mile-an-hour fastball. Now, whether or not that drops a little bit with some of the velocity in terms of the dynamics of the game in America, we'll see what happens. But he does have a 5-pitch arsenal, which I think most teams would salivate at. You want to have a pitcher that can reach into the bag of tricks and do whatever they wish and get strikeouts for it. And he also is a 50-50 pitcher, which means 50% of the time it's a ground ball, 50% of the time it's a fly ball. The more grounders you cause, the better your results will likely be, especially if you have a good defense behind you. So really, really good signing by the Astros here. And it's likely that they could possibly be on the verge of trying to compete with the Seattle Mariners for the AL West crown in 2026. Because when you look at, the staff at the moment, they do, again, there's your 1-2 punch. Hunter Brown and Tatsuya Imai. Outside of that, there might be some question marks, but they still have room for maybe.
They still got Christian Javier, right? Christian Javier's still in the conversation. Yes. Yeah. So he's a quality arm. I don't know what happened to Blanco, if Blanco's still in the picture or if he's injured. I think he had Tommy John, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I believe he had Tommy John, but they do have some pitchers in the pipeline that they can tap. And don't forget, they still have Josh Hader, who returned to form after a rocky 2024. And on offense, they still have Jeremy Pena. They still have Zach Paredes. They have an incoming Cam Smith. Yordan Alvarez should be coming back soon and could possibly return to form in 2026. We'll see.
And Carlos Correa as well, right?
Yep. And Carlos Correa returned from the Twins in a trade with the Astros, a very interesting trade at the time, man, mind you, that essentially cost nothing. So really, really interesting upgrade here for the Astros. and could be very, very worthwhile. But yeah, what do you think about the selection, guys? What do you think about this?
Well, I like the MI signing. I think he's just he's a well groomed pitcher. He's at age 27. He's coming into MLB around the same age as Imanaga, right? So roughly
Hmm.
around the same age. So he seems more polished and less of an experiment than like a Roki Sasaki would be.
Yeah,
Yet he's still got elite stuff. So I'm really interested to see what he looks like, and I'll be watching closely during the WBC because I think he's probably throwing for Team Japan. So that'll give us an opportunity to kind of see what he's all about during that tournament.
yeah, yeah. Chris, do you have anything to add on Tatsuya Mai or Okamoto? Thoughts?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, I think just the thoughts that I had in terms of, especially Toronto signing, it just it seems like, for Toronto, like Doug sort of outlined with where everybody's gonna move, it really does seem like they're probably out on any other infielder, which is, I think, good for my team. Sort of the domino effects. One less team in on an infielder means the teams that have been in on Bo Bichette and Alex Bregman, obviously, the two, probably best bats left in free agency pool, at least, maybe on the market altogether, depending on who's actually available in trade. But certainly free agents wise, as that market shrinks, as far as suitors, it gives more and more chance, for the Red Sox to probably get something. So I sort of liked it from that perspective. And like Doug said, I think, he fits perfectly to what they're trying to do. I think I would argue it's a downgrade overall from Bichette, depending on what he ultimately becomes, So I think, but I think when you put it in conjunction with all the other moves they've made, it's certainly they're a better team than they were last year, and last year knocked them on any of that for any stretch. And I think Houston, has sort of, flagged that they're moving on from Valdez. And I think they were always kind of, after that issue they had with him and the catcher last year, with him, like deliberately hitting his catcher, I think Houston kind of wanted to move on from him. And I also think that's why we haven't heard much about him in free agency. I think people aren't sure about that, no matter how good of an arm he is, So I think Houston filled their hole well, and it'll be interesting to see. It's always, so hit or miss from when they come across the pond, so to speak, over to MLB. Who's going to be able to make that transition, and who isn't. And more often than not, we're able to predict that, at least in some capacity. But it's still a little bit of a roll of the dice at the end of the day. So it'll be interesting to see how those two develop for their teams.
Do you think the pitchers really are a roll of the dice? I think for the most part, the only one where I can think was not really a great success story would be Irabu, right? The tragic story with the Yankees way back when. But every other Japanese pitcher that I can think of has at least had moderate success. They may have not turned out to be a superstar or as dominant as projected, but for the most part,
I think that's really I guess I would say maybe not lived up to the expectations some people held of them. Maybe that expectations were too high. Like I would say to say Kikuchi, has been good, and he actually turned it around, especially when he went to, a couple different seasons.
He's been dominant that time. Yeah. He's been dominant.
He has, but when he came over, it was expected to be pretty dominant right away, and he wasn't that, for Seattle. I would say Daisuke Matsuzaka for the Red Sox, even when he came over, he put up interesting numbers, but, the running joke of his, 7,000 hour long 5-inning game because he walked everybody under the sun, so he underwhelmed compared to what people expected of him. And there's been, those are the two that pop out off the very top of my head. But I guess the question is, if they're expecting him to replace Framber Valdez, that means they need him to be a number one or a number two. You know what I mean? It can't just be acceptable. he has to be an ace or close to it.
Right.
And that's where I wonder if he's going to be able to be that for them.
Yeah, I think they're better at implementing load management now than they were in like Dice K's day, for example.
Yeah, that is certainly true. That is certainly true.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think the problem with him, if I remember correctly, was just the adjustment to the expectation of throwing close to 200 innings, and he just couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
Where I think teams are much more willing to implement load management right away if they need to.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think that, we'll see what happens with regards to the how they roll out or how they develop Hatsuyamai in that Houston rotation. That's going to be pivotal for 2026 and how they perform during that stretch, especially when it comes to crunch time later in the season. But before we move on to the next subject, one last player that did sign, Munetaka Murakami, signing with the White Sox, 2 years, $34 million. Nobody saw the White Sox signing Murakami. Was essentially at the last second. I think it was just before his window closed that they signed him. There were some concerns about his contact ability, his whiff rate on 95 plus mile an hour pitches, which would be very interesting. And there was a general lack of interest, unfortunately. So the White Sox might have gotten a steal because don't forget, this player, Murakami, set the single season Japanese home run record a couple of years ago. And he has huge power number. He has huge power potential. I don't remember exactly what his stats were, but he was hitting somewhere around 40 to 50 home runs a year on average. He did have an injury in 2024, and he did slump a little bit, did return to some form in 2025, but he does have a high whiff rate, about 40%, a little higher than that possibly, which is alarming a little bit, but he does have a 14 to 17% walk rate, which is very good and may help offset some of that. So the White Sox might actually have gotten a steal here if they develop him properly and then roll him out. But the White Sox, they desperately need a power bat in that lineup. And they need a lot of things, especially coming off of their decrepit 2024 season. They did improve in 2025 a little bit. They did go up to about 60 wins. They do have a couple of prospects that are coming into fruition. Edgar Cuero behind the plate. They still have Colson Montgomery. They still have Kyle Teal. They have Shane Smith. They have Sean Burke, a couple of guys. So what do you guys think about this signing? Did you expect the White Sox to swoop in and take Murakami for first base? What do you guys think about this move that the White Sox made?
No, not at all. I did not expect that at all, but good for the White Sox doing something for their fan base, right? Even if it's just that one player that the fan base can finally rally around and show up for. I mean, if he goes out and has a 35 to 40 home run season, then that'll rally the fans. That'll put some butts in the seats, as they say. And it's not, entirely hopeless. There's a little bit of optimism there now with some of the players that you named. I like Sean Burke as a potential ace. He could turn into an ace. So you never know, right? In that division, if it's going to be any division that the White Sox are going to see a resurgence, it's absolutely in the AL Central, right? So if that's a division where they're potentially going to be competitive, then, all the best. I wish them the best. Let's see if it happens. Let's see if they can turn this thing around.
Yeah, definitely. I think, this is a very interesting signing because don't forget Colson Montgomery actually had set 21 home runs, in 71 games, which is great of a pace. When you actually look at the overall team, their home run leader was Lennon Sosa at second base, who played 140 games, but he had an OBP under 300. So it's a really good signing, especially in terms of pop and in terms of production for the White Sox. So we'll see exactly what happens. Maybe they'll get back up to somewhere near 500. It really depends on how these players' second year goes and how Murakami integrates himself into the lineup. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, just quickly moving on to our...
it surprised me that it was only a 2-year deal.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like there were plenty of teams who were interested in him. I guess, was the AAV just that much more with this?
Well, there were
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there were concerns with regards to his contact rate, and there were with regards to higher his performance on higher velocity pitches. those over 95 miles an hour, 96 miles an hour, 97 miles an hour, they trailed off. That was the understanding that possibly if he faced big league pitching, especially with relievers that pitch 98, 99, 100, or starting pitchers that now reach 97, 98, 99, 100 at times, there were concerns whether or not he was going to be able to produce at a high level, especially in Major League Baseball. But that was the concern. We don't know how he's going to perform. So, again, we'll have to see what happens with that. But
Yeah,
that was the general concern.
We definitely heard Murakami's name much, much more, way more often than we did Okamoto's name.
Yes, we did. Yeah, it's very interesting, and that we'll see what happens after those 2 years. Maybe it's a very good deal, maybe it's a not so good deal, but it falls into the court of the White Sox. So moving on to our next subject, just relatively quickly, there's still a good amount of free agents out on the free agent market, both on the lineup side and the rotation side. And we want to focus on both sides, but let's really focus on the three large remaining names, maybe four large remaining names. That's Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, Framber Valdez on the pitching side, and perhaps Bo Bichette, or maybe even another pitcher in Ranger Suarez. Or if we want to go back to the batting side and not pick Bo Bichette, Alex Bregman is still out there. So there's a lot of players that are still waiting to be signed and still having negotiations. So let's really dissect just very quickly who we think is going to sign these players and who's going to get the best return on investment, essentially. But kind of starting off with that, I did write an article for Stadium Rant not too long ago. I think it was about a couple of weeks ago, just talking about where some of these best remaining free agents will land. I still believe Cody Bellinger will likely go to the Yankees on a 5-year deal to lock him for a long period of time. And the consolation prize, which would be Kyle Tucker, could possibly go to the Mets on a 7-year deal because, again, the Mets need another bat because, again, you've just lost Pete Alonso. You've lost Nimmo. You've lost a lot of guys in that lineup that really produced, unfortunately. And it's unfortunate because that team had just gotten Juan Soto. And there's issues with regards to the outfield. Nimmo's not there. Tyrone Taylor's not necessarily great. You're not sure how some of the younger prospects are going to perform. So we'll see what happens with that. But I believe that Tucker could move to the Mets on a 7-year deal. Now, with regards to the pitchers, I still believe Framber Valdez could possibly go to the Orioles because the Orioles still need another pitcher. They still need another strong arm in their rotation, even though they just traded for Shane Baz, which we'll get to shortly. And Ranger Suarez, I believe he could sign with the Mets as well, possibly a 1-2 doubleheader with Kyle Tucker, possibly, because, again, the Mets also need pitching. They do have Nolan McLean. They do have Jonah Tong, and they have Brandon Sproat. They could use them in the trade and possibly get somebody else, but they also do need a lot more help outside of just one pitcher. And if they do decide to keep some of their prospects, Ranger Suarez might be the way to go. So what are you thinking? Where do you think some of these guys will land, especially with regards to Suarez, Valdez, Tucker, Bellinger? You got any other players in mind, especially Bo Bichette?
Yeah, I mean, one name that I don't hear mentioned at all is Chris Bassett, and he is a workhorse of a starting pitcher. And any team that's really strapped for starting pitching at this moment in time should really be pursuing him for a 1-2, even a 3-year deal. He's 37, but he really didn't show any sign of wearing down. He's a workhorse. He'll guarantee 30 plus starts each and every season. And, he might not be an ace, but he's a solid number 3 starter. And a team like the Yankees, I think, or even a team like the Cardinals in the NL would be wise to pursue a guy like that. Now, Ranger Suarez, he's more of what I would believe to be ace material, right? And I could see the Mets going after him for the front end of the rotation before going after Tucker in the outfield. And one interesting thing that you said was, with regards to Tucker anyway, would be that he's a consolation prize after Bellinger. And that's not how I see it. As a non-Yankee fan, I think Tucker is a far superior player to Bellinger. I mean, that's just my opinion in watching them play over the last 3 or 4 seasons. I would much rather have Tucker in the heart of my lineup than Bellinger. Bellinger's a good player, but I just see Tucker as an elite player, if that makes sense. So that's
interesting. Now, again, I am viewing it from a Yankee perspective. And of course, left-handed batters do really well, especially power hitters with that short porch in Yankee Stadium. So there's a little bit of a bias there. So definitely Kyle Tucker is very strong. He is definitely elite. You can easily put him in the elite category, especially because he's a little younger and he does have a little bit better of a contact number. And he's been more consistent throughout, whereas Bellinger had a really nasty dip in the middle of his career, then recently just came out of that. So yeah, definitely.
And he strikes out quite a bit. I mean, he's improved his strikeout rate, but he does still strike out quite a bit. And your lineup does not need any more people who strike out. Like, to be fair, the Yankees do not need that.
Definitely a concern for the strikeouts. I did see Khris return. Khris, do you have any, predictions with regards to who might end up where? Do you think Alex Bregman's going to go back to the Red Sox possibly?
Yeah, so I think Bellinger is ultimately going to come back to Yankees. It just makes too much sense for that connection. Even though I agree with what Doug was saying, I do think Kyle Tucker is actually a better player overall. But Bellinger seems so well fit for Yankee Stadium and sort of that lineup, and based on the way they've been maneuvering, I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. I do think Bregman is going to come back to Boston. I think that's another connection that just makes sense to me, especially with Toronto now certainly out on the Bregman sweepstakes. There have been some rumors they were, sort of poking around there, but potentially even out of Bichette. And speaking of Bichette, a new name had emerged very recently on Bichette, and I think it's actually a very intriguing one, and that's the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't know if you guys had already spoken about that, but I think, that seems like such a Dombrowski move to go out and just, get somebody, like he just seems like the type of GM, that's always gone and just spent some money, when he's needed to. And the Phillies have been very quiet too. And I'm not even sure Bichette's a great fit for them per se. I mean, I think he is in the sense that, they've relied a lot on power and not a lot on contact. And I think Bichette's one of the best in the business at contact, or at least he was last year. So I actually think it would be a good fit for their lineup too. I don't know positionally.
Well, you got Stott at second base. You got Stott at second base.
Yeah.
And then you got Turner at short, right? So
right, I knew we had Turner at short. Yeah, I couldn't remember off the top of my head what their infield looked like. But they apparently have been kicking the tires on him, at least if reports are to be believed. And I actually do think that would be an interesting place for him to land. And I think Valdez, the other biggest name, I would say, I think actually San Francisco could end up going and getting him. I mean, I think, Buster Posey is big on pitching, and I think, the Giants' best offense is a good defense in a way, I think, in that division. And so I could see them adding another pitcher to that arsenal. So those are my predictions, I guess, for the 4 big names anyways.
Interesting. Very interesting picks with regards to that. Now, now we're going to move on to the last segment of our broadcast, and that's going to be who we think has had the best offseason, the worst offseason, and who's been a surprise this year. But I will start off with that. We'll just go, list our best, list our worst, and list our most surprising. So for my best, I believe it's a tie, to be honest with you. I think it's between the Baltimore Orioles and the Pittsburgh Pirates. And why do I say that? Well, both of those teams have addressed much needed holes in their lineups and in their rotations. So with the Baltimore Orioles, obviously their largest signing of the year so far is Pete Alonso, 5 years, $155 million. Big power bat. They needed a power bat. They needed pop in their lineup. They got it. They also did get Zach Eflin to a 1-year deal. They're bringing him back for some veteran presence in that rotation. And they also did make a trade with with the Tampa Bay Rays for Shane Baz on December 19th. That was a package of prospects that they sent in, which includes Slater DeBron and catcher Caden Bodine, both of their prospects, as well as right-hander Michael Ferre and outfielder Austin Overn. Really interesting trade. And that shows they're really serious about reconstructing their rotation after a dismal 2025. That was their biggest concern, especially with really bad pitching performances throughout the entire year, as well as the injury to Kyle Bradish, who will also be coming back in 2026. So that's something to really consider. Now with the Pittsburgh Pirates, same thing. They recently signed Ryan O'Hearn. They did make a trade also with the Astros and Rays for Brandon Lowe, which involved a couple of prospects: Jake Magnum, Jacob Melton, Mike Burrows heading to different teams. Big signing because Brandon Lowe is a great second baseman, and he could really help give some presence and some contact in that lineup, especially with the Pittsburgh Pirates offense being just awful this year, awful in 2025, which is really, really poor. So they're making some moves that they absolutely need to. And they did get Gregory Soto too, which helps their bullpen out a lot. And they also have a couple of prospects on the rise. So we'll see what happens with the Pirates, but don't be surprised if they make a serious push later in the year, especially at the trade deadline for maybe somebody of note. Now, with the worst team, I'm going to go back to my Yankee rant earlier in the broadcast. Not really much has happened. Really has just been centering on whether or not Bellinger comes back to the team or not. They've missed a couple of players as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And I think I said everything in that portion of the broadcast, so I don't really have anything else to add. Now, my surprise this year for me has been the Athletics, to be honest with you, and there's a reason for that. They made a trade, and they also locked down one of their cores of their lineup. So the first thing they did was that they traded for Jeff McNeil with the New York Mets. The Mets have been selling pretty much everybody, and this was an interesting trade, but it does make a little bit of sense because Jeff McNeil is a little bit of a utility player. He could also replace Luis Arias at second base for maybe a year or two until Leo DeVry is ready to come up, hopefully in 2027. And they also did lock down their right fielder or their left fielder, and catcher Tyler Soderstrom for 7 years and $86 million. And we're starting to see a trend with the Athletics signing their players, their core players, to long-term deals, especially with their impending move to Las Vegas. So that's my surprise for this year. But I want to hear what you have to say, Doug. Who you think has been the best? I think the answer is obvious. Who do you think's been the worst, and who's been your surprise so far this year?
Well, first I'll go with the best. We didn't really talk about the Blue Jays, but I think that honestly they have won this offseason. Right out of the gate, they signed, the frontline starter of this free agent class, being Dylan Cease, and they signed him for what was, I believe, a 5-year deal, wasn't it?
Yes.
4 or 5 year deal. It was a 5-year deal that they signed Cease for. A little bit higher on the AAV than we probably would have liked, but I think with pitching coach Pete Walker, Dylan Cease actually has more in the tank than what he's shown thus far in his career, and what he's shown so far has been pretty awesome, really, in terms of dominance and just being a strikeout machine. So he's going to lead that rotation, but it wasn't only him. As I said, the international scouting department of the Blue Jays has been amazing. They went out and got Cody Ponce from the KPB, and he was the MVP last year. Has a minuscule walk hit per innings pitched whip count. That should translate well into MLB. Forget all the other stuff, velocity and so forth. He has that, but it's the whip that will, I think, translate from being a highly effective pitcher in Korea to still being a really good pitcher in MLB. But that's not all they did. Of course, they just recently signed Yuma Okamoto. But in the bullpen, they really solidified the bullpen with guys who have pinpoint control and funny arm angles, right? So they got Tyler Rogers. He was awesome with the Mets, right? And they also went out and got Chase Lee in a trade from the Tigers. So 2 highly effective, high leverage relievers. So they've improved their bullpen and they've improved their depth and versatility as well. Now, in terms of my surprise, I love what you said with the Athletics. I like that they got Jeff McNeil. They needed some leadership presence in their clubhouse with all those young, heavy hitters like Kurtz and Jacob Wilson. They needed a veteran in the clubhouse, and I think McNeil still has plenty left in terms of offensive production, and he'll be a leader for them. Kind of like what Severino was last year for that pitching staff. I like what the Phillies did in terms of bringing Schwarber back, but they also got Adolis Garcia. So think of the heart of that order if Adolis Garcia can bring some production. They've got good pitching. They've got an awesome ace with Christopher Sanchez. They've got a great bullpen. They've got Johan Doan at the back end. But with Schwarber, Harper, Adolis Garcia, and Trey Turner and Boehm, and, I don't think they're going to see Castellanos in the lineup anymore, but they've still got a heart of an order that's just elite, right? And they're they're going to be really tough to beat. They still need starting pitching, but I do like what they've done in terms of their free agent pool. And lastly, the Mets, I love that they went out and got Jorge Polanco. You can put him anywhere in the infield, and it looks like they're going to probably put him at first base. He's a great hitter. He's a great hitter. He'll hit 25 home runs, maybe more than that, maybe 30. And with that, maybe that'll take some pressure off Mark Vientos, and he returns to form. And they've improved their defense considerably by putting Marcus Semien, trading Brandon Nimmo and bringing in Marcus Semien to play second base. And I'm so looking forward to seeing that middle infield of Francisco Lindor and Semien up the mid. And, they still need some starting pitching as well. But I think the Mets have improved with the moves that they've made. And, of course, the other teams mentioned, specifically Baltimore. But I don't think Tampa Bay has lost that much in trading away Baz. They went out and got Cedric Mullins, who also is going to provide some leadership in that clubhouse because they've got some young studs similar to what Oakland has. And, they're going to have Shane McClanahan coming back to lead that rotation. So what they've lost with Baz, they're going to bring back and have with McClanahan, hopefully returning to form. So some interesting moves. But I will say that my Blue Jays, I think, probably won the offseason in terms of free agency. I'm biased, but I think I've made a strong case to make that claim.
No, you have a really strong case to make that claim. That team has done a lot of signing. It's done a lot of moves, especially with their rotation and their lineup. They could easily go back to the World Series and possibly win it in 2026. Really good, really, really good. And don't forget, you also have a couple of prospects in the pipeline, not coming up this year. Maybe you'll see the return of Ricky Tiedemann, maybe in 2026, but you also have two infielders in Arjun Namala and JoJo Parker, who likely won't be up until 2027, but some really interesting times in Toronto. So you're right to make that claim. And
you're talking about Parker and Namala. They are highly touted, and they're number one picks. They're first round picks.
Yes.
So why sign Bichette to a long-term deal, and why clog up this infield when those two guys are studs? Like, they are coming to MLB. They're not duds of a pick. They're not just going to sit in Double-A forever. They're knocking on the door of making it to the show. So I don't think is good long-term planning to sign Bichette to the terms that are being talked about.
Yeah, I think that's also something else that needs to be considered in terms of the Bichette conversation. But we'll see what happens as this offseason goes along. Now, we are a little bit over the time limit, but really great conversations all around, especially as we're in the middle of the offseason and the free agency period. Don't forget, the international free agency period will start within the next week or so. So we'll see a flurry of activity on that front as well. And we'll likely see a couple of the dominoes fall within the next week or two, especially when it comes to the last remaining large-scale free agents. They'll likely will fall before spring training and pitchers and catchers report. So we have again run out of time, but again, thank you so much for tuning in on this first edition of 2026 for Dirty Leather. For Doug, Chris, and I, again, we want to thank you for spending 2025 with us, and we can't wait to see you continue forward in 2026. And of course, you know,
Right.
absolutely. I wish I had a shirt like that. But you know,
I'll see if I can
I
hook you
do.
up. I'll see if I can
We'll
hook you
we'll
up.
see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. All right. So again, for Doug, Chris, and I, this has been Dirty Leather, and we will see you hopefully soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.